Hello and welcome to another episode of Killer Ant Reviews. Today we'll be talking about Brandon Sanderson's Way of the Kings, book one of the Stormlight archive. I really didn't know much about this author or the book before I actually started reading it. I actually saw it at one of my local game stores, and I was like, oh, this looks interesting, so I bought it. Plus, the cashier also recommended it too. He said it was great. And I actually don't regret this. This is an awesome book. First of all, it's big. It's about 1,250 pages long. This is probably the longest book I've ever read. And yeah, it's slightly more than any of the Game of Thrones books, and there's actually multiple books in the series. So I actually am waiting for the second one. So, so this is basically a book that actually has multiple characters' points of view. With the main character being Kaladin, he is a surgeon he was a soldier trained as a surgeon from when he was younger, who's basically sentenced to be part of a bridge crew. And with that, bridge crew is basically a death sentence. You're basically hauling these huge bridges with about like 20 to 30 other people across these plateaus, like what the cover shows. Which actually also I have to mention the covers acts is really awesome. Love the fact that they actually show the swords and the plateaus that they've been fighting across. I'm not sure what you are. Oh yeah, bookmark. Get. Yep. Back is basically explaining kind of the plot. But basically, he's been sentenced to this, and despite being part of like this repeat suicide runs, he never seems to get seriously injured. Which is part of the plot. I'm not going to dive deeper into that, but his entire goal is to save as many people. That's his entire character. Because he felt like he's failed multiple people before. He has friends that they all get killed in his past life. In his past. Basically, there's him in him at the present and then him at the past, which shows his backstory throughout the entire book. While it is a very slow burn, it's like a slow burn, but progress has been made. Like every chapter, it's like doesn't feel like much has happened, but at the same time, you feel like the characters made progress, if that makes sense. There's a few minor characters too, including like a very skilled assassin who really doesn't like killing, but his honor demands him to follow like a master, and whoever like holds like this item has control of him, and he's compelled to obey. And my cat is currently yelling at me because he hates it when I lock him out of my room because he's usually annoying. Then there's like two other characters, including like a high prince who's leading one of the armies. While the other two characters aren't as interesting, they get better as the book goes on, which I absolutely love. The High Prince character is a guy who he reads this book called The Way of the Kings, which talks about honor, and since there's multiple armies actually fighting it, but none of them are actually working together, they're all on the same side, but none of them actually like to fight with each other. So you have like different armies trying to attack, which is why the war is kind of continuing without any end. And his goal is to try to find someone to work with him so they can go ahead and win the war once and for all. But he also knows that not everyone wants to work with him. And his viewpoint's pretty interesting, especially when it gets to the end where it's just an action-packed ending. There's also a woman who's also has a very interesting backstory. I forgot what her name was. She's probably like the least interesting character, but also gives like a interesting female point of view, and it also takes away from the war too. All these characters definitely gives you like a bunch of exposition throughout the entire book too. It's not like, oh yeah, here's 300 pages of exposition. They give it to you gradually, while also developing the characters too. And yeah, it will be impossible to explain the entire book in usually just like a few minutes that I would usually do these videos. But like I said, it's definitely a very, very, very thick book. It took me a long time to read, but I enjoyed every single chapter. They also have it's like about 70, 80 chapters, plus a bunch of like interlude chapters, which are just like 2 or 3 pages of just like setting up some minor characters, which is kind of interesting. There's also some, and like I said, there's also some interesting minor characters, like a guy called Wit, whose his job is basically insult, like, like whoever, like his leaders, like enemies or friends, and he's like the only one who can really get away with it. Too, it's kind of like a court jester, except this guy's basically paid to be basically a jerk. Not his insults are usually not funny, but and no one really likes him, but that's the way he is, and he's pretty much one of the smarter ones. Another thing about this book that's interesting is the weapons, and some of the people too. Like when the enemies that they're fighting actually like grow their own armor, so the armor is actually part of them. And the enemy is also very honorable because if anyone defiles their dead, they go after them. They get really offended, but they are also more honorable in combat too, which they noted. But the weapons and armor, certain people have like things called like shard blades, and I think and like certain special armor. Basically, shard blades can cut through anything. Think of like a lightsaber, except it's like this kind of blade, and armor that you can penetrate after a while, but takes a lot of it has to take a lot of damage. And one cool thing is if you defeat someone who has that like weapon or armor, you actually get it. It doesn't matter if you're like part of like the light eyes, which is supposed to be like the higher class, of the dark eyes, which is like a lower class of people. If you defeat it, you get that sword and armor, which is definitely important to the plot and many huge events too. Yes, I've been talking about this book. I absolutely love this book. If I had to give it a rating, between 1 and 10, this is definitely a 10. This is the best review book I've ever had on this channel. I know Escape from Prison was the best book so far, and this one beats it out. There's really no comparison. If I do have to complain, a couple of the other side characters did start off a little slow. Some of the chapters really weren't as interesting, but it's also the fact that Kaladin's story is much better. It's not that their stories are bad. It's like watching two movies that are good. You have like one movie that's really, really awesome and one that's good but not as awesome. It's really hard to compare. But I'm still waiting for the second book to come in. I can't wait to read it. If it's anything like this book, it should be very awesome. Okay, that's it for the review. If you ever want to check this book out, I would highly suggest it. Especially if you like reading a lot. Like I said, it's a really hefty book. It's not for everyone, but I 100% suggest it. So until next time, this is Killer Ant.